Hi, this is the Unwilling Pawn, and I'm going to complete now my subseries of the war in Afghanistan, which is the subseries of the 9/11 conspiracy theory series. So in this one, I'm just concluding everything, and obviously when we discuss all the topics, it was easy to, each one of those topics are volumes of themselves, volumes of information and potential information. You could say libraries of information themselves, so it's easy to get lost and forget the point. And often people do that when they talk about the 9/11 conspiracy theory, because there's so much there. It's so much of it goes so beyond 9/11. But here what we're going to do is summarize or focus on the key points from each subsection and try to understand how it adds to our case that 9/11 was an inside job. Now we bring everything full circle. As discussed prior, topics like rare earth minerals, oil and gas, drug trafficking, and Western hegemony go way beyond both the war in Afghanistan and the 9/11 conspiracy. However, it was necessary to give enough background to understand both what happened and why. In covering these topics as they apply to the war in Afghanistan, we stumbled across many proofs that add to our case that 9/11 was an inside job, that criminal elements of the U.S. government and powerful corporate interests were themselves the masterminds of the 9/11 atrocity. What I'm going to do is we're going to go back to each of the main key points, like let's say rare earths. All right. Now, when we discuss the rare earths, let's also go back to the intro, what we talked about. Okay, example I gave, a murder case, right? Now you have incentive to lie, or incentive to kill someone, right? And you're saying you're innocent. So here, we're charging the government. We're saying, okay, you were involved in 9/11. So no, this is a crazy conspiracy theory. It's all lies made up. Okay, well, you had an incentive. You said you went to Afghanistan to get after Osama bin Laden and punish the Taliban for being with Osama bin Laden and Al Qaeda and all that stuff. You know, that was the justification for going into Afghanistan in the first place. Well, if we find out that you had huge incentives, motivations for going into Afghanistan, that tells us something. That tells us that you were lying all along. That goes to your credibility, goes to your whole war on terrorism, everything. And it adds to the contention that, of course, 9/11 was an inside job. Of course, you're lying. Of course, you were involved in 9/11. That's why you went into Afghanistan. And you went into Afghanistan with this pre-planning. And we see many examples of this pre-planning. But let's start with the mineral wealth angle. Okay. Mineral wealth, when you see, remind how important it is for strategic control. When 85% of the entire world's economies and modern militaries are all dependent upon the rare earth and mineral wealth. These kind of minerals, lithium, collection of 17 elements, the lanthanide series. We talk about the rare earths, where they're found, and of course how important they are, what they're used. Lithium-ion batteries, laptops, mobile phones, and wind turbines, satellites, night vision goggles, rangefinders, aerial drones, guidance systems, lasers, hypersonic weapons. It's so essential to the economy, and it's so essential to the military. All the new technologies all heading there. And the world desperately needs hybrid car batteries, electric vehicles. We need to get away from our dependence on fossil fuels. So this technology is vital to survival of modern economies. In fact, the quote that I gave you from the the Caspian Report again, rare earth elements are indispensable to modern nations, economies, and militaries. So with that in mind, and Afghanistan having a potential mineral wealth value of $3 trillion, an industry that could be developed with enough investment, of course, in infrastructure and so on and so forth. Technology that, of course, America has, China has. Now, with China having 85%, and even now, you see the lamenting and you see the desperation. This is not a secret anymore. Everyone knows that America and all the world powers are desperate. All the world's people are desperate to have rare earths in their control, especially the world powers. China, one of the rivals of the superpower, has 85% of virtual monopoly on the global rare earth market. So if you're dependent on one of your potential enemies, possible enemies, in a future war, he controls all your military technology, whether you have that technology or not, whether you can use that technology. Does that not tell you how desperate the situation is? You're going to tell me you went into Afghanistan to save the women, or to go after Osama bin Laden for attacking you on 9/11? No. You went in there for mineral wealth, to get access and control to $3 trillion worth of mineral wealth. The strategic control that control over the rare earth offers. That's what you're after. It goes to incentive. A murderer has a life insurance policy, and he claims, he loved his wife and he would never kill her. But now we find out that you got an insurance policy of $2 million or something. It doesn't mean automatically that you're guilty. It's not just it's one piece of evidence. It goes to dismantle your narrative. You said, hey, I love my wife and I would never have any reason to kill her. Well, we see 2 million good reasons to kill her. Maybe it was an insurance scam. You murdering her was an insurance scam, insurance fraud. You wanted to get that $2 million. That legally, morally, you're not entitled. And of course, the immorality of murdering her. Both crimes that were committed. You have a very good reason. You have incentive. So this whole thing is really about incentive as it relates to the 9/11 conspiracy theory. You had an incentive to go into Afghanistan. And then, of course, we get to the other information that we got into. We talk about the oil and gas. We talk about, when we talked about the oil and gas, and especially the timeline of how this all happened. We mentioned the timeline of events. We talked about the sent gas pipeline. Some of the timeline of events, we discussed that, the American officers, they knew exactly where, that one, here's one. In July 2001, 3 U.S. officers, Tom Simmons, former U.S. ambassador to Pakistan, Carl Inderforth, former Assistant Secretary of State for South Asian Affairs, and Lee Coldren, former State Department expert on South Asia, met with Pakistani and Russian intelligence officers in Berlin and told them that the U.S. is planning military strikes against Afghanistan in October. So they're talking to the Pakistani Russian intelligence officers back in July 2001. And of course, we know that the attacks were happened on September 2001. So on what basis would you be invading Afghanistan in October? And now this is obviously the sources were The Guardian, the BBC, and the Pakistani Inter-Press Service. That's the Pakistan military establishment's press release, so press service. So you have to look at this. How can you ignore something like this? That goes directly to prior knowledge. On what basis? And I mentioned this when I talked about the oil and gas section, especially the timeline events. But on what basis would you have to attack the Taliban? What reason? What justification? Sure, we related this to the oil and gas section because there was pipelines involved. There's oil and gas involved. But it was not just related to oil and gas, especially this prior knowledge and attack against the Taliban. Of course, getting rid of the Taliban, pipelines were involved, of course. Pipelines, the Tajikistan pipeline, the TAPI pipeline. In fact, originally India wasn't involved. It was just, you could say, TAP pipeline. It was just the one called sent gas. The idea was to take that natural gas that would otherwise go to Russia or most likely China. Especially China was more desperate for oil and gas. So yes, this was about that, and the timelines were important because we're talking about how all this happened and why the attacks happened at the time that they happened, and where the oil and gas discussions were taking place, and Hamid Karzai and all that stuff. Sure, we discussed that, but here it's directly related to our main point about the 9/11 conspiracy theory. In July, this prior knowledge, in July that you're going to attack in October. But on what basis? 9/11 hadn't happened yet. So let's tie this into the murder case example we gave. Prior knowledge of bad acts. Let's say, okay, maybe not a murder case, but let's talk about let's say even a terrorism case. Let's say there's a person he sees an attack or any a terrorism case or attack, any kind of, let's say, a school shooting or anything. Like a person's just sitting there calm, like he knew it was going to happen. And he doesn't do anything to help the victims because he wanted it to happen. So It's not proof right there that he was involved, but it certainly warrants investigation. So why is everyone else running around in panic and this guy's sitting here cool and calm? And he didn't even flinch when the bomb blast happened or when the attack, because he expected it to happen. It goes to evidence. Prior knowledge. You knew something was going to happen. That's why you did. And that's one of the reasons why you were spared. You didn't, everyone else was killed. Many people were killed. Bullets flying everywhere, but no one touched you. Because those guys worked for you. Mafia attacks, all of this stuff. It goes to prior knowledge. Your prior knowledge, this obviously is submitted to court, and you're bearing false testimony in court. I didn't know this, or I didn't know that. And it turns out you did know those people. You did have a connection with them. Or you did know when they were going to attack. Which implies what? That you were obviously involved in the attack. I mean, in normal cases, the logic is more than enough, and those people would be convicted if just one thing was found out. It's more than enough evidence to link them to the crime. But here in 9/11, we just keep giving more and more links, direct links of prior knowledge, of incentive and motive that dismantles the entire narrative provided by those same military-industrial complex ruling corporate elites. Call them whatever you want. All of the narrative completely dismantled. Yet, we just have to keep providing the evidence, and then we're told, oh, was all just a crazy conspiracy theory. Timeline events obviously mentioned many other things like we can just go through it again. It was in January 2001, the Bush administration ordered the FBI and intelligence agency to back off investigations involving the bin Laden family. Now, we're not going to get into the whole link between them. I think I'll have to do a whole separate paper just focusing on prior knowledge, because there's more that implies prior knowledge than just this. Here, the intent was different, but I tossed in some of those facts. There were very important facts that imply prior knowledge and the connection between and the protection of the bin Laden family. As early as February 2001, the NSA had broken Osama bin Laden's encrypted communications. So we found him in a cave, and the the CNN reporter went where the CIA could not. And remember that, what's his name, Bill Cooper, he mentioned this. He mentioned that how ridiculous it was. And he figured, this was before 9/11, he said something's about to happen. Something's about to happen. How can the CIA not know where this Osama bin Laden is when the CNN reporter can climb in the mountains and find him when hiding in whatever cave he's hiding in? It's beyond unbelievable, the lies that these people expect us to swallow. But for some reason or another, as I mentioned, because people are biased for one reason, they don't want the truth, they don't want to hear it. So they continue to lie to themselves and lie to the world and keep the lies of the real terrorists alive, the masterminds of everything. Sure, the people on the ground are the terrorists because they're committing the terrorist acts, but they're always working for these guys. They're the masterminds behind all of the monstrosities that we see in the world. In May 2001, the then Secretary of State Colin Powell gave $43 million to the Taliban, purportedly to assist hungry farmers whose opium crop was destroyed by the Taliban. I couldn't take this out of the war in Afghanistan paper. Maybe it wasn't directly related to the sent gas pipeline, but there was a link because we talked about the oil and gas meetings. The Chinese National Offshore Company hired Henry Kissinger. So some of this was important background. Though it was not directly related to oil and gas in Afghanistan, war in Afghanistan, but it was related to the war in Afghanistan. What was the justification? Now, why are you sending $43 million to the Taliban? To assist the hungry farmers whose opium crop was destroyed by the Taliban. Taliban is supposedly the enemy, who you're about to bomb in October, which you're already pre-planning. And in July 2001, as I mentioned, those 3 U.S. officers would go and tell the Pakistani ISI and the Russian intelligence officers, hey, go tell the Taliban, especially really the Pakistan ISI, telling them, hey, you go tell the Taliban, we're going to come to the country and we're going to bomb you. Why are you going to bomb them? Why? 9/11 hasn't happened yet. And of course, Osama bin Laden, 4th and 14 July 2001, receiving kidney treatment for kidney disease at the American hospital in Dubai, and met with a CIA official, who then returned to CIA headquarters without detaining or extraditing bin Laden, in spite of him already at this point being the mastermind behind the attacks on the USS Cole and multiple U.S. embassy bombings. So this was before 9/11, July 2001, but he was already wanted internationally. Yet he's sitting there getting kidney treatment in a friendly UA country where U.S. has great influence. U.S. could go grab him anytime they want. It's according to the Le Figaro newspaper, 31st October 2001. Okay, let's talk about the oil and gas angle. Again, this goes to incentive. Your incentive was clearly to rob China of the oil and gas. Yes, it gives America more oil and gas, but it's not like the reserves in Kazakhstan would hold you over for very long anyway. Maybe 10 years more, you'll delay the inevitable. But if you could completely control if American companies could completely control all of Kazakhstan, and that oil would first go to the U.S. through tankers and everything else, pipelines and that sort of thing. Pipelines that would go through to Pakistan and then be shipped out by ship containers to the U.S. So all that oil and gas that you could get access to, sure, it's a good supply. It's a decent amount of reserve. But it wasn't just about the reserves. It was about hegemony. It was about big powers competing for power on the earth. That's what it is about. Getting rid of my rivals. China is my rival. They have a serious energy crisis. They've had an energy crisis for a long time. Their population was at that point, growing out of control, and now they've finally gotten it under control. But the fact remains, Chinese are desperate for natural gas and oil, or energy wherever they can find it. They're installing in all of the Western China, basically Western half, or even more, you could say 60-70% land mass. Traditionally, China that hasn't been occupied because a lot of desert land and land is not good for human life. It's not as arable land. There's less crops that can grow there, that sort of thing. So they're using all that land for solar farms and everything else that they can't use it for settlements. The Chinese know their land. A lot of that harsh terrain, they use it for alternative energy. They're trying to get energy wherever and whenever. And China is at the forefront of alternative energy, the best they can do, because they're desperate. They're that desperate. I don't care what the investment is. I need this. Otherwise, I won't have any energy. I'm completely dependent on oil and gas. And that oil and gas, I don't have any supply. I have to keep importing it. So where do I get it? China's one source would be obviously Turkmenistan, would be Kazakhstan. Who else would they sell to? One of the biggest buyers for Kazakhstan. That would do wonders for their economy. Of course, they're happy to sell. And less logistics means cheaper costs. It's good for both buyer and seller. Huge incentive for U.S. Again, you say you were there for the women and getting rid of Osama bin Laden and punishing them and getting revenge for 9/11. And a lot of people were saying in America in politics, the war in Afghanistan had to happen. That response was necessary. Response to what? A 9/11 that you were yourselves involved in? Here you have an incentive to go in there. It has nothing to do with revenge for 9/11. It has oil and gas. It goes to your credibility, goes to your incentive and motive. You say you had no motive to kill, but now we see you do have a motive to kill. You did have an incentive. Huge incentives. Oil and gas is big, and not just for yourself, not just to get that oil and gas for yourself, but also to deprive China of that. One of the reasons why America is in Sudan is because that's one oil source for China. So wherever China is getting its oil, block that access. So you can cripple them and prevent the power in the East from rising. That could one day challenge the U.S., become a superpower. Some might say China is already a superpower. I disagree. They're certainly an important power. They're certainly a big power in the world. But are they at the level of America? Obviously not. That's why the China and Russia have to have the BRICS alliance just to be able to compete with America. So then we go into the drug section. Again, with the drug section, we learned, okay, one, this whole, it was such a huge, 70% of the world's heroin, and 40% goes to the U.S. 70% of the world's heroin, and this market didn't exist before. The links between the CIA, drug trafficking, in let's say Central America, South America, that history, understanding that history, again, that goes into incentive. Why? This is something that, what's his name? Michael Rupert stressed that, this is one of the reasons why America desperately needed 9/11 to happen, to keep that drug trafficking going. If you get control of Afghanistan, then you can establish that drug trafficking trade, and you don't want anyone like the Taliban coming in there and breaking it or controlling it, whatever they're doing, stopping that drug trafficking altogether, stopping the opium production. You don't need someone from Taliban coming in and replacing that opium with wheat crop or something. You don't need that. So to have complete control of Afghanistan and remove, or have, planted or puppet governments that facilitate the production of opium, that's what you need. And with that kind of incentive, drug trafficking, as we talked about how big the business is, we talk about the global black market. While $2 trillion is the typical estimate, but that's based on seizures and consumptions. So how much is seized by police? How are you going to know how much there's in the black market? For example, we talked about the $8 trillion the U.S. spent on the wars in the Muslim world, but that doesn't include how much the generals made in addition. While that money didn't come from America, it certainly was made by them. So that's all in the black market. That's not included in that $8 trillion figure estimates. That's extra money that those generals pocketed. So if they were owners of, and they were owners of these huge opium poppy fields. You had Danny Schwartz, and it's just one witness. You can find countless honest American soldiers. You'll find other people who contradict that, but this many testimonies, it's enough to say, yes, okay, it's true. A lot of these generals, they owned a lot of the opium poppy fields, and they had those fields for what? To make money, to keep the drug trafficking business, and keep laundering through Wall Street, keep funding the American system. So they think that they're like doing a service to America, keep the finance system as it is going, which is not good for the economy, because again, 40% of the heroin that's produced in Afghanistan goes straight to the United States for consumption. That's poison for the people, but money in the pockets of these drug pushers who are posing as generals. Talk about how big that drug trafficking is. It could easily be 5 trillion, could even be 10 trillion, but it's hard to tell how big the entire global world black market is. It's just the nature of the black market. It's so undocumented. It's hard to say how big it is until someone funnels the money through the bank and you somehow find the paper trail. Until such time you catch it, or you catch them consuming or something, you have to have one way of calculating it. And there's no way you can know all of the black market, how large that black market is. Could easily be $5 trillion, maybe in 10 trillion, but that would maybe be pushing it. I don't know. I would say 5 trillion easy is my best guess as to how large the world, and because, as we mentioned, the drug trafficking racket is a huge part of that. As I think the second biggest part. The first part is counterfeiting and pirated goods. So basically, stolen goods that are sold in the black market, stolen cars, whatever. I mean, whatever's sold, and you strip the car for parts and sell it everywhere. This stuff happens all over the world, particularly in third world countries where there's less law and order. So it's very common to have a market that everyone knows about, and everyone knows where the parts come from in that market. They know it's from stolen cars, abandoned cars, auction cars, and also stolen cars. They know where those parts come from. So that counterfeiting, pirated goods, okay, that's the largest market in the black market. Largest has a lion's share. That, and then drug trafficking. Drug trafficking is number 2. Always. In any black market calculations, how large is this market, black market industry, how large is this market, you're always going to get these simple, straightforward facts that in terms of dollar value, there's not in terms of quantity. Maybe when people are being bought and sold as slaves, where they are as human trafficking or prostitution, well, people are sold for cheap. And drugs are worth more. Things are worth more. Cars are worth more. Electronics are worth more. They're pricey. People are not, especially when they're at the point where they're being traded as livestock. They're not worth that much. So remember, this is about dollar value. We're not talking about quantity. So it could be lots of slaves all over the world, part of the global market, but they're not sold for that much. So that's why the lion's share in terms of dollar value is a drug trafficking racket, and of course, more than that, it's the counterfeiting and pirated goods market. So talk about how big that market is, and the fact that Afghanistan was not the world's capital for heroin production. In fact, there was no such thing in Afghanistan. Opium was produced, morphine was also produced, and of course some people were producing heroin, they knew how to do it. But it certainly, the market wasn't anywhere close to this. And at that time, the world's biggest provider of heroin was actually Burma, Myanmar, that part of the world. It wasn't Afghanistan. It only became Afghanistan with the coming of Osama bin Laden, with the coming, the timeline is crystal clear on this. The coming of the CIA. And we look at the CIA's long history. That's why we went into all of that, with the whole drugs business. We talked about the whole long CIA drug trafficking Wall Street Foundation. And then you look at that huge incentive for the generals to lie and to keep that war going because they're getting good money from their opium poppy fields. It's an incentive for them to keep that war going and keep lying, keep the defense contractors happy, where they're going to get jobs later. We talked about that as well. Incentive on top of incentive, lie on top of lie, to keep the war going for 20 years. Oh, we're doing good. We're going to bring the Taliban down. So people are like, okay, when? 20 years have gone by. When? How much longer is the war going to go on? The heroin smuggling. Huge incentive. You say you went in to get revenge against Osama bin Laden for the supposed attacks on 9/11, or his involvement or masterminding the attacks on 9/11, when in fact the real masterminds were the CIA themselves. Were behind it all. The criminal elements are, you could say, there's obviously honest CIA members, there's obvious honest FBI members, but there's dishonest ones as well, crooked ones, treacherous ones, traitors who were involved in 9/11 attack, who were involved in the planning. And we see some of the huge incentives that they had. They say they're not guilty. Well, we see your incentive. We see how much you had to gain, how much you continued to gain. We see that all of those generals later got jobs with the defense contractors, how filthy rich they became. Again, go straight to incentive. Then we recall the Western hegemony. That whole incentive, or why not just the war in Afghanistan, but 9/11 attacks. And we go back to the founders of the war on terrorism. Go back to Zbigniew Brzezinski. And I gave you the background, his Polish background. Of course, we talked about the Mujahideen and the Soviets and the whole Cold War. He was one of the his chief strategists and masterminds of the Cold War. That was his one of his crowning achievements. And we talk about some of his quotes. Just remember from the Grand Chessboard. The attitude of the American public toward the external projection of American power has been much more ambivalent. The public supported America's engagement in World War II largely because of the shock effect of the Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor. So this is what they're thinking. So the attitude towards America becoming an empire and being seen as such, and that's so negative and that sort of thing. The hippie generation. You have to understand the baby boomer generation. How do we get them to be just as warmongering as us? How do we get them to hate all the people we hate? And all these lovey-dovey type people, I mean, they're too much about, like, 90s were all about love, the 80s were about love, and 70s were about love. It's too much about these lovey-dovey type people. We don't need that, man. We need these people to be ready to fight war whenever we ask them to kill whoever we ask them to kill, to hate whoever we ask them to hate. So they're like, these people are too hard to control. So, of course, there was a lot about the Eurasian states and how to bring them to heel. And so that attitude of the American public toward the external projection of American power has been much more ambivalent. The public supported America's engagement in World War II largely because of the shock effect of the Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor. And then that unbelievable quote, the foundation, the mindset behind the foundation of the war on terrorism itself. Moreover, as America becomes an increasingly multicultural society, it may find it more difficult to fashion a consensus on foreign policy issues, except in the circumstances of a truly massive and widely perceived direct external threat. Again, the same mindset, the same concept. These people are becoming too multicultural. There's too many hippies amongst them. How do we get them to all unite? There's black people, there's white people. Black people didn't used to have rights back in before the 60s, 70s. And you had all this emancipation and everything. All this is going on. You have too many cultural changes. Immigrants moving from all over the world. And basically there's assimilation going on. And with all this multicultural society, how do we control all these people? How do we get them to hate the enemies we need to hate? And the answer is a direct a widely perceived direct external threat. Before that was Pearl Harbor, before was the World War II going on, and the Axis versus the Allies. Now you need the external threat of terrorism. And again, just the foreshadowing, the coincidences. Add this to all. This coincidence by itself might seem okay. Well, some people just have a foresight about what's going to happen in the future. Great. Yes, you could make that argument definitely about some of these super geniuses. But how can you have this coincidence along with all the other coincidences we've talked about? The founder of the war on terrorism talking about how these people, you obviously have the hippie generation and all these people in the Fox News and MSNBC, they were talking about this on live air. I remember post 9/11 that the Generation X needs to prove itself, prove that they're loyal to America. How do we get them on our side? How do we get them thinking the way we, because they're all over the place. They have a completely new mindset. They're not the same 50s types Americans. How do we get them under control? How do we get them to hate Russia? How do we get them to hate China? How do we get them to hate the Muslim world? How do we get them to fight who we ask them to fight, kill who we ask them to kill without question? To see that it's all in our country's best interest. You have, white versus black. You have all kinds of racial issues, tensions in America. How do we get them all united? Moreover, as America becomes an increasingly multicultural society, it may find it more difficult to fashion a consensus on foreign policy issues, except in the circumstances of a truly massive and widely perceived direct external threat. And as I said after that, after his quote, after Zbigniew Brzezinski's quote, enter Osama bin Laden. That's why they keep showing you his face again and again. Feel threatened. These people are bringing their Islamic Sharia law, and these people, they don't value infidels, anyone that's non-Muslim. They want to kill everyone. Well, these Muslims existed before. Why is it all of a sudden Osama bin Laden? And they're all a threat now. They weren't a threat 50 years ago. They weren't a threat 100 years ago, 200 years ago. What happened all of a sudden? They're the biggest threat in the world. Although it's not that the Muslim countries are the biggest powers. In fact, most of the Muslim countries were and still are in decline or in just broken countries, failing economies. Even if they have oil, they're still failing because only the super elite benefit from that oil. Everyone else is still living in the old world, living out in huts or out in the desert or something. I mean, they have no connection to the modern world. They really don't know anything, and many of them don't care. They still live in the simplistic, old-style way. So even none of the Muslim countries are really modern or industrialized or advanced to the point to be able to compete with Europe. So how, or Europe or America, especially America, and how do you see them as a threat? Well, you've got to make them see a threat, well, because of their crazy religion and their hate-filled holy book, the Quran, and their desert prophet, their backward prophet, Muhammad, and Osama bin Laden, and these terrorists and the radical Islamic terror. So you keep filling their head with this nonsense to make them feel widely perceived direct external threat. That's how we get all these people who are so different, who hate each other, who all the time are fighting each other, can't live with each other. How do we get them all united? How do we get them in this increasing multicultural society, get them fashion a consensus on foreign policy issues? Everyone's ready to bomb Afghanistan right after 9/11. Oh, Osama bin Laden, he was linked with the Taliban. Mission accomplished. Because people swallowed the lies. They were taught the lies from day one and they swallowed it. How can you ignore such a huge coincidence? He knew exactly how to manipulate the American people, and then that's exactly what they did. And now you say, going back to our case against the government, or the criminal elements of the government, well, you say all of this was written in the 1997, I think, or 1998 book, 1997. It was published in 1997, which means they were planning this from long before. So these ideas were in his head. The ideas in the military-industrial complex, or the ruling elite, or the Zionists, call them whatever you want. The Grand Chessboard, American Primacy and its Geostrategic Imperatives. It's a 1997 book. Ideas been there for quite a while. Well before 9/11. 20 years before 9/11. 30 years before 9/11. How can you ignore such a huge coincidence and tell me that means nothing? Maybe by itself it means something, and it's something to look at, but along with all of the facts and evidence we've discussed, how can that not be prior knowledge, prior planning? Everything that happens, we need 9/11 to happen. We need to have this widely perceived direct external threat to get all these hippies and black people and white people and even Mexican people, Latin American people, get them all united to hate a common enemy. To keep showing terrorists on monkey bars. They're all training, and they have this really radical Islamic terror and beliefs, and they're coming on their monkey bars right after they're trained on their monkey bars. They're coming here. They're coming to America, and they're bringing their Islamic Sharia. And we got to do something about it. That widely perceived direct external threat. They hate us. They want every infidel dead. And Osama bin Laden's their leader. They keep presenting him as if he's the leader of the entire Muslim world, which wasn't true. All lies, all of false reality. But how would someone living in America who doesn't know many Muslims, doesn't know many people from the Muslim world, doesn't have any exposure to that, doesn't go outside America, doesn't go outside the bubble, how's he going to know? He's just going to keep believing the lies, and that's exactly what happened. So many people were ready to kill every Muslim, so fired up. Then they're not like evil people. They go to Afghanistan and they go to Iraq and they find out, man, some of them even converted to Islam. They go there and they find out the whole situation is completely different. Everything we've been told is a lie. Everything we've been told is a lie. And this was planned, which implies what? That of course 9/11 was planned. You need that widely perceived direct or external threat, and it all started with 9/11. The war on terrorism and the attack on Afghanistan. 9/11. It all started with 9/11. The war in Afghanistan was essential to the 9/11 conspiracy. Sure, there's so much here. We talk about oil and gas and mineral wealth, and especially like the rare earth metals. This stuff, it goes well beyond 9/11. It goes well beyond the war in Afghanistan. It's not limited to Afghanistan. These topics are discussed everywhere, and they're so important in our lives. They affect so much of our lives and so much of what's going on in geopolitics. It can't be limited to just one locale or one war or one event, one atrocity. No. They're linked to multiple atrocities all around the world. And 9/11 was the one big one that they were directly linked to. Mineral wealth, oil and gas, drug trafficking, Western hegemony. These are the reasons America went into Afghanistan. These were the incentives. Pre-planning, we see all of it. We see the Taliban surrendering. So take it, Osama bin Laden, we don't want him. Like, no, we're not going to give him... Their excuse then was, we're not going to give him an honorable death. Just an excuse to keep the war going. Use feminism. Use whatever you can. Keep lying. Keep saying, oh, we're doing a good job against Taliban. We're just about to beat them. All more. We're almost there. Install the puppet leaders in Afghani leadership. Miniskirt politics. Feminism. Hedonism. Sexual freedom of women. That sort of thing. Keep using that. Use your supporters, liberal supporters in Pakistan, in India, in Afghanistan. Keep them pro or anti-Taliban and keep that war going. Give them excuse to keep fighting. Keep that war going. Keep pounding the Taliban into submission, which never happened. Look how stubborn they are. The Taliban are like, oh, I don't care, 20 years, 40 years, 80 years, I'm not ever going to stop fighting for my country. And you're going to keep wasting your trillions of dollars? The war in Afghanistan was a direct result of 9/11. So analyzing the war in Afghanistan and why America went there has everything to do with what 9/11 was about. We discussed countless facts that point us in that direction. I'm sure maybe some of you might feel we got so sidetracked because, again, I had to give the background. Obviously, these topics are so vast, or the knowledge and information within these topics or these, you could say, fields of study are so vast that they deserve papers and projects of their own, books that have been written or more that could be written, entire libraries of information just discussing this. Obviously, I couldn't get into that, and of course, but we needed to get at least some of the background. So you may have felt, okay, we maybe detract, or what is this all about? That's why I put in this section in this video, just to bring it all together. We discussed it when we talked about those videos, but of course we discussed so much else. So maybe it kind of got lost, the message, the overall reason why we covered the war in Afghanistan in so much detail. Detail that made us kind of think, okay, but 9/11, this, as he mentioned, Michael Rupert, this stuff goes so well beyond 9/11. The reasons why more attacks will happen, just like 9/11. It doesn't have to be on American soil. Why more wars will start. It's for the same reasons, the same motivations. These are the links between the war in Afghanistan and the 9/11 conspiracy. I hope this is information was, good and informative, this video and this audio and these narrations. I hope the information is good for you. I know you could, a lot of these are educational points for themselves. I give background, of course, not a full research paper on just oil and gas or just mineral wealth, but a lot of them were informative from that angle as well, to see how close we are to an oil and gas disaster for the world. Of course, we tied it into war in Afghanistan, but it's not limited to that. So I hope this was informative. Like, share, subscribe, spread the information, spread the awareness. If you have any criticisms of how I could do this better, and I'll continue to try to improve my videos. I'll go back and perhaps even I try to improve the videos by maybe improving the graphics, perhaps. And I just don't see any way I could break down the videos, because there are a certain amount of topics that I want to discuss per video. So I'll do my best to improve the videos in whatever I can, because I'm not. I'm a relatively new YouTuber. But I just try to give accurate information and discuss the topics from a fresh perspective that you just don't see anywhere else. Most people don't discuss it, and I try to summarize all the important points that are relevant and really conclude the matter. Although when we're not concluding here, the 9/11 conspiracy theory, there's plenty more videos. Like I said, we have to talk about the. I mentioned in the intro video, I think, some of the topics we're mentioning, we're going to discuss. We still have to talk about all the witnesses that were disappeared. I mean, so many other things. The prior knowledge information that we discussed within this paper, the War in Afghanistan paper, that's nothing compared to the total information. Yes, it's important, some of the most important pieces, but there's many, many other signs of prior knowledge. Prior knowledge of criminal elements of the U.S. government and powerful corporate interests, business elites who were themselves involved in 9/11 attacks. All of them had prior knowledge. Even if one particular officer was not involved in the attacks, well, he could still have reported these people. He could have reported them to the proper authorities. You know that an attack is about to happen on your country. How are you going to let that happen? So the fact that he didn't report, that tells us something. He's at least complicit in that sense, although he wasn't part of the original planning. So at every level, which officer knew what, and based on that, how he behaved, what he did, what did the NSA know, what did the CIA know. If they're already broken Osama bin Laden's communications, then they know exactly where he is. Then all of this is just a charade. Sure, we talked about the war on terrorism and Zbigniew Brzezinski orchestrating, planning, everything ready to go. The pre-planning all ready to go. But this just touches the basis of what we need to discuss in terms of prior knowledge. And of course, I'm going to talk about building number 7, the so-called, basically, or it was fires, I think. It wasn't even hit by a plane. We need to discuss all of that, the engineering aspect of the towers falling. And there's still many, many other topics to discuss that go into our case against the criminal elements who were involved in the 9/11 attacks and all the hell that they've raised on this earth in the name of that 9/11. I ask you to take it seriously, to spread the awareness, knowledge. Help me out wherever you can. If you think there's a way I can improve the videos, let me know, to make them more attractive so more people will listen and get this information. I'm open to those suggestions. Thank you for watching. This is The Unwilling Pawn.